Good day, grade sevens. Today we will be looking at the types of economic activities. And I'd like you to please take out your social studies textbooks and turn to page 116. Previously, in our previous lessons, we discussed the different types of economic systems. But today we will be looking at the types of economic activities. So I'd like you to turn to page 116, please, and also for you to have a pen or a highlighter ready so that we can annotate important information. So here we see that lesson 2 focuses on the types of economic activities that we get around the world. People all around the world wake up to their daily routine activities such as going to work, school, factories, or even farms and fields. They do not think about how and who organizes their life when it comes to things like transportation, electricity, water supply, and many others. These activities are some of the many different economic activities that help make life in any city easier or more acceptable. Yet, these activities are categorized into 4 groups. Get your highlighter ready or pen. Primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. Those are the 4 types of economic activities that we now get globally: primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. What might each type of such economic activities presented above stand for? So now we're going to try to understand these 4 different types of economic activities. And here it further goes on to read, whether on the farm or in the field, the farmer works with soil, water, and plants. He raises animals which graze in the nearby meadows and sells their meat, milk, and skin. He works with natural resources. Here's an important word for us to annotate. Natural resources. Want us to underline that, please? Natural resources. And his work is considered to be a primary economic activity. I want you to underline primary economic activity. So primary economic activities, we can say that something is a primary economic activity when it involves a natural resource such as farming. But we need to deeper understand this concept. It says here, all economic activities which depend, underline this, all economic activities which depend on natural resources are included in this category. This category of primary resources. Now I want you to think of a school setting. When someone, another word for elementary school is also primary school. So that's the beginning stages. Everything that we need to make basically comes from the earth. So that will be a primary economic activity because we use natural resources. Again, underline fishing, any types of mining, forestry, and extracting gold are activities which belong to this group. Primary resources, primary economic activities. The first people, nomads, depended on such an economy. So the nomads were the first people who used to walk around or walk from settlement to settlement where they could survive and where they could live. And they depended on primary resources. Right, I'd like us to turn over to page 117, the next page. And here we will continue reading, and please also again have your pens or highlighters ready. Agriculture is the basis of a primary economic activity. Underline that, that's important information. Agriculture is the basis of a primary economic activity. What is agriculture? Agriculture has got to do with farming. People around the world get involved in farming for 2 reasons. They might grow plants and animals to have crops and food enough for their personal use or for their village's needs. Now, in this case, the activity would be considered to be subsistence farming. Underline subsistence farming, please. Also underline for their personal use. When people grow crops for their personal use, it is then known as subsistence farming. Most of the agricultural activities that take place in the developed countries fall under this category. Now, when we talk about developed countries, we're talking about countries that are not first world countries yet. The people are poorer, there's less jobs, okay? So people in such a country, such as a developed country, needs to rely on subsistence farming. They farm for their personal use. When people work in agriculture for the purpose of selling their products in markets, this is different. Now we have people working in farming or in agriculture for the purpose of selling their products in markets. The activity will be called commercial farming. So now we are not farming for our own personal use, but now we are farming for business sake, to make a profit, to make money, to produce more. Brazil, for example, is one of the countries which has become recognized in the production of sugar, cotton, and soybeans during the last few years. So now we see here that there's also two types of farming, but not too much focus on that. The second type of economic activity is the, underline this please, grade 7s, is the secondary activity. Now, we know that primary economic activities depend fully on primary resources. Okay, we know this. Okay, now, secondly, we have secondary activity, which depends, underline this please, which depends on the usage of raw materials in order to produce or manufacture more expensive products. And here's a good example. So if I had to say, for example, that give you an example of a strawberry farmer. A strawberry farmer would fall under a primary economic activity. However, strawberry, for example, might be used to produce jam. This is different. When I produce the jam, that is a secondary economic activity. Because now I'm taking the raw material and I'm producing it into another product, which is jam. That then becomes a secondary economic activity. Here, the work again might be of two types. Don't want you to focus too much on this, but just listen. It is either a cottage industry or a commercial one. Now, when jam is homemade, it belongs to the first category, which is the cottage industry. But when it becomes manufactured and we make the strawberry jam by huge quantities, quantities here means amounts, by factories, it becomes a commercial industry because then we are then making a profit. The same as commercial farming. Let's move on. Okay, over here, sorry, I just need to erase this for you. Over here, we're going to read through this page as well, just for understanding. Not all people participate in the above kinds of economic activities. So we've discussed primary economic activities, where primary economic activities, it depends on natural resources. And in secondary economic activities, we use the natural resources to make another product, such as the example of the strawberry jam. And I want you to also think of your own examples. Many people specialize and become doctors, nurses, engineers, electricians, etc. Etc. here means and so on. These people provide others with specialized services. So here, I want you to underline, many people specialize and become doctors. This entire sentence here, until the word services. So they specialize in services. They also participate in the economy, and their economic activity is referred to as a, underline, tertiary economic activity. Now, as I tried to explain earlier, that if we look at the school setting, we have the primary school, the middle school, and high school. We could sort of analyze it in the same breath, we could say that primary activities remind us of primary schools. It's the natural resources that we use. The middle school is like the secondary activity where we start making the products from the natural resources. And the tertiary economic activity is the more advanced and developed economic activity where people more provide services. In fact, many of the services we depend on in our daily lives belong to this group. We don't have a limited place where such activities exist. Wherever people live, services are required and a tertiary economic activity is provided. So the tertiary economic activity is more like services, and the examples they are given: doctors, nurses, engineers, electricians, etc. People who provide a service. We then have the last type of economic activity, which is called the quaternary activity. Underline quaternary activity. Let me get my annotation correct. Quaternary activity. Okay, I see it's on white. There we go. Right. Now, quaternary activity, this is a new type of advanced economic activity which includes fields of researches. Let me see if I can get my annotation. Okay, there we go. There we go. Quaternary activity. This is a new type of advanced economic activity which includes fields of researches. So when people do research, transforming information, in other words, transforming it using the internet or changing it, and governmental work as well as educational fields, these are quaternary activities. This type of activity depends a lot on the use of technology. So quaternary activity has a lot to do with technology. Keyword: the availability of the internet makes this field more advanced and much easier, especially in communication. Last paragraph. Countries around the world can't produce all the goods and services that might be consumed by its residents. Therefore, they trade their products with those of other countries, depending on their needs and market demands. Importing and exporting are the basis for any trade to take place. When countries import, they buy the products they need and bring them into their country. When the same country sells its own products, it exports them to other countries. Such acts help in developing the economies of countries. Right. For this lesson, I just need you to understand the 4 different types of economies, as well as subsistence farming and what commercial farming is. We're now going to have a look at some of the questions in your activity. So I'd like you to turn to page 119, please. And here on page 119, we see the following questions. Number 1. Write the name of the group to which each of the following belongs: primary, secondary, tertiary, or quaternary. Now remember that a primary economic activity uses natural resources. A secondary economic activity uses the natural resources to produce a secondary product. The tertiary economic activities provide services, whereas the quaternary focuses on technology, as well as researches, transforming information, and government work, as well as educational fields. So these are questions 1 to 15, which we have to say if it's primary, secondary, tertiary, or quaternary. In exercise 2, or question 2, it asks, what does the term subsistence farming refer to? And number 3, what is commercial farming? Now, I'd like us to have a look over here. Right, question 1. A farmer would be a primary activity. Okay? Number 2, a builder would be a secondary activity. Because remember, a builder is, it could fall under secondary or tertiary. This is a broad concept because a builder uses raw or natural products and he provides a service for them. So it could also be a tertiary one. Number 3, an engineer. An engineer would be a tertiary economic activity because the engineer is providing a service. Number 4, the government. We know that the government falls under quaternary. Number 5, electrician would be a tertiary economic activity because they are providing a service. Number 6, information, quaternary. Number 7, a fisherman would be a primary economic activity because he's only taking the natural resource. He's not producing it into something else. Number 8, a potter. Someone who's using something like clay, which is a natural resource, to produce or make pots would fall under a secondary resource. Number 9, a nurse would be a tertiary economic activity because she's providing a service. Number 10, the nomads, the people who lived very long time ago, primary economic activity. Number 11, anything that's got to do with mining is a primary economic activity. So the coal miner would be a primary economic activity. Number 12, a painter providing a service would be a tertiary economic activity. Number 13, a banker providing a service, a tertiary economic activity. Number 14, this was an interesting one, a tourist. A tourist would be a quaternary economic activity because they have got to do with transforming information, researchers, learning about a new place. And lastly, a photographer also who provides a service would be a tertiary economic activity. Now, for exercise 2 and 3, I would like us now to quickly go back to page 117. And for exercise 2 and 3, the question asks us, what does the term subsistence farming refer to? Now, a bit earlier when I was reading the text and explaining to you, subsistence farming was found here. It says people around the world get involved in farming for 2 reasons. They might grow, here we go. They might grow plants and animals to have crops and food enough for their personal use or for their village's needs. In this case, the activity would be considered to be subsistence farming. That is what subsistence farming is. Subsistence farming refers to people having to supply their own crops or grow their own crops for their personal use. The emphasis there falls on personal use. If we look at question 3, what is commercial farming? And just a little bit lower in the same paragraph, we will find this answer. Here we go. When people work in agriculture for the purpose of selling their products in markets, the activity will be called commercial farming. So there's a difference. So subsistence farming is when people grow their own crops for personal use, and commercial farming is when people work in agriculture or farming for the purpose of selling their products in the markets for a profit. Right, thank you, grade 7s. That brings us to the end of this session.